Hey everybody, this is the Fourth here, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at send tracks. Send tracks, or just sends, can be used to reduce CPU load, improve your workflow, and provide you with some cool processing techniques. Just like buses, you will learn more about how sends will be utilized in your productions as you become more experienced. But I will be introducing you to some common techniques and techniques that I personally use a lot in this tutorial. So the first technique that I'll be looking at in this video is possibly the most common technique that is used regarding send tracks. And this is to utilize a send track when you want to add a certain kind of effect to a number of different tracks. And this is only going to work with effects that you can have wet only on as an option, or where you can turn the dry to 0%. And some examples of these type of effects are chorus, reverb, and delay. So if you have, one of these kind of effects with that wet only option that you want to use on a number of different sounds in your mix, you can put this effect on a send track and then route your other tracks through it that you want to affect, rather than placing the effect on each track. And so you can hear, if I have this drum beat here, and I want to kind of add some reverb to it to give it a little bit better of an atmosphere, I can use one of the 4 sends here, and I'm going to rename it reverb. And then I'll place a reverb on it. And then, you can set the reverb to be whatever sound you want. For this drum sound here, I want it to be relatively small reverb, not too long or anything. And so I'm just going to choose bright, warm room. And then you do want to make sure that the effect is only passing the wet output. So I want to turn the dry all the way down. And now you can hear when I route the snare through that reverb. When I turn that up, only the amount of that reverb is changed. So I can set that to whatever level I like and do whatever like that. And then I can do it for all of the other drum sounds and have it be really quick, rather than placing the same reverb on each track. So this will save you quite a bit of time, and it can also save you CPU usage depending on which reverb plugin you're using, because some reverb plugins can be pretty CPU intensive if you get too many of them in your mix. So, using a send for reverb is one example, but you can do it with chorus as well, like I said, and delay, and really any kind of wet only effect that you would want to add to a number of different mixer tracks. And in FL Studio, you do have these 4 sends here. And really the only things that I use these sends for are for the reverb. Anything else that I do with a send track, and even sometimes for reverb, in certain cases, I will use a self-made send track created from just one of the normal mixer tracks. So really I only use these for reverb and very rarely delay as well. So while I'm on the topic of using wet only effects, another thing that sends allow you to do is they allow you to process those wet only effects separately from the original sound. So you can hear if I have this snare sound sent through that send reverb, and I wanted to kind of change the character of the reverb. Maybe I want to cut out some lows or do whatever to it. Maybe I wanted to add a phaser to the reverb if I wanted to kind of get a little bit creative or something. Using a send track allows me to process the reverb or the chorus or delay or whatever wet only effect I'm using on that send track independently from the snare. And so a really common technique is just going to be using that to EQ your reverbs. Maybe even do mid-side EQ on the reverbs or all kinds of different things. Yeah, so if you don't like that kind of ringing sound caused by the reverb in the lower frequencies, you could cut that out without cutting out from the actual snare. So that can, definitely be a very useful thing to do, is just use a send track for any wet only effects that you want to process separately from the original tracks that are sent through it. So another technique that I will use send tracks for, not one of these 4 send tracks over here, but like a self-made send track, is if I kind of run out of effect slots on a certain mixer track. So say this hi-hat sound, I filled up all of these different things with different effects, and it was all full, and I didn't have any more room for other effects. What I could do is I could send it through a different track, and then that will open up 8 more effect slots for me. So this is definitely something I use not so much while mixing. I use it a lot more specifically creating hardstyle kicks. I'll have like 2 or 3 or even 5 different tracks that are just all different EQs and distortions and stuff like that. So that's probably something that you'll use more for sound design than actual mixing, but occasionally you might use it for mixing as well. And just being able to have 8 more effects can really help you out sometimes. And now the last technique I have written down here is using send tracks for parallel processing. And what this means is, let's say I have this kick sound, for example, and I want to do some parallel processing with it. What I will do is route it through a second track. And you can hear that the level of the kick will now be louder because it's sent through the master track twice. And now I want to process one of these differently than the other. So I have 2 outputs, and the processing is just going to be a little bit different. So maybe I want to do some distortion. And so you can hear that if I were to only distort the original sound, the whole sound is distorted. But if I do this parallel processing, where I have the original sound sent through the master and also sent through the distortion separately, it still keeps some of that original sound. And parallel processing can be very useful in the sound design stage especially, but it is used in mixing occasionally as well. New York compression or parallel compression is a very common example of utilizing parallel processing while mixing. So those are the techniques that I have for sends written down. And the most common one is just going to be these wet only effects, or to process the wet only effects differently. So any reverb, any delays, anything that you want to use on a lot or even all of your different sounds, using a send track can really improve your workflow and save you CPU usage. So that's probably the biggest. And I mentioned the others just because I thought it might be helpful to know about those. And really what you use SYN tracks for is completely up to you. You can use them for whatever you want. In the end, whatever makes sense to you is what you should do. And you'll probably get more familiar with how you plan to use SYN tracks in your production as you kind of get more experience. But hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully it gave you a few good ideas and will help you come up with your own different techniques for using SYN tracks.